So she turned around and
Be able to show the screen on
Good,
YouTube.
because
Dave said he's got a business.
about that.
Oh, yeah?
If you want the speaker or
Steve McKenzie.
It's on.
good.
Like it's going.
That's good.
Started.
Oh,
Yeah, that's what I remember him saying.
I'd like to call this meeting of the Board of Education Budget Overview to order. The mission of Tyler County Schools is to provide student-centered learning opportunities that ensure all students will learn to their potential and master the skills, ethical behaviors, and attitudes needed to be successful citizens in a 21st century economy. Please rise for a moment of silence and the pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, roll call. All board members are present, with Mr. Hiley, the superintendent, present also. And I will now turn the meeting over to Mr. Hiley.
Mr. Hiley will now turn the meeting over to Jeff Lancaster.
All right, well, tonight we are going to talk about next year's financial budget for Tyler County Schools. I do want everybody to know that this is being live streamed on YouTube, and instead of our lovely faces up here, we're going to have that screen live streamed on YouTube, because I think what I'll be presenting is kind of more important that people can see the presentation than to hear me talk. Well, they'll still hear me talk, but one thing I'm going to say is this is based on the final computation. So when I say final computations, that means the state aid funding formula they come up, even though we don't get state aid funding, which I'll talk about later, there's still a lot of computations that go into that these are the final numbers. So sometimes we do these presentations a little early and it's based on preliminary numbers. These are final. So I always start with my presentation. For those of you who don't know me, I've been the treasurer in Wetzel County for 24 years. Took over for Jeff Davis, who was here for close to 30 years. Between the two of us, we've got over 50 years of managing school operations and financial operations in school systems. So I've done a presentation similar to this for 24 years. I always start with some kind of cartoon, and I really like this one because it tells a little bit of difference of maybe accountability that we see nowadays versus what we saw maybe back in 1969. And instead of blaming the student for some of the grades or attitudes, we're blaming the teachers. And because of that, we have a teacher shortage. And that's about as big of a problem in education that I think we as a nation are dealing with, and certainly in West Virginia and in Tyler County. And I promise I said Wetzel County by accident. Forgive me, 24 years. But I do have one slide that does pertain to Wetzel County because I think it shows the impact, and it's this one right now. Those binders, you can follow along, make notes if you'd like. These are just the slides that you're seeing here. But I have a friend from Wetzel County, Jay Yeager. He was a former board member, former assistant superintendent, former principal, former history teacher. But he told me this one time, and it really hits home about the problems that we face. Back in the day, a second grade teaching position in New Martinsville would have 130 applicants. Today, we have one or two. And so one of our biggest struggles is we have to be competitive because we are competing for all these neighboring counties and neighboring states for quality staff. It's tough. I'm going to start really talking about how budgeting works for public school systems. It's kind of different because the reason I have a picture of a pie up here is because let's just say we have a pie and we're going to feed everybody in this room, and it's given to me first, and I take a real big slice of that pie. And then I pass it down here to Mrs. Stender, and she takes an even bigger slice of that pie. When it's all said and done, everybody else is getting a smaller slice. That's how it works with public education. You know, that pie, just picture a pie graph on how much money we have and how much we can allocate to all these programs. If we're going to spend more money on maintenance and facilities, we're taking it from somewhere else on that chart because we know how much revenue we're going to have. If we spend more on instruction, we might have to cut transportation costs back a little bit because we know how much money we have. I used to budget for a Fortune 500 company I lived in Mount Sterling, Kentucky, but the company was out of Carthage, Missouri. It's a company called Leggett & Platt. When we budgeted, we can change the size of that pie. We can change the amount of our revenue. We can advertise. We can raise prices. We can lower prices. So many things we could do. Introduce new products that can make that revenue go up or down. Doesn't work that way with school systems. We know what our revenue is going to be next year. I may not be able to tell you exactly what it's going to be 3 years from now, but by March, when those assessed property values come out and the final state aid computations come out, we know how much revenue we have. So we have to balance the budget based on what we have coming in. This is a depressing graph, but everybody that's familiar with Tyler County knows that our enrollment has severely dropped over the past several years. And I say several years, I mean we're going all the way back to 1980 right there in this graph. Because of that, we have to change some things. Number of buildings, there are a lot of things we have to change because of that. That right there, that graph, the way Mr. Davis was budgeting, the way I budgeted for most of my career in Wetzel County, that was the biggest thing that impacted how much money we had. Because the state aid formula, the funding formula that we get from the state used to be the majority of our revenue, was based on how many students we have. So when you see that line going down, you see our revenue going down. And that's why, the middle of that graph, I think I got it, right in here, Jeff Davis was telling me about all the cuts we had to make back then when that enrollment dropped and the revenue dropped. And so that was huge. State aid funding formula is almost exclusively driven by student enrollment. That was before this. And that changed the game as far as these oil and gas rich counties like Tyler County. It changed the game because whereas student enrollment was the driving force, it's now property taxes. I put this together, and of course this is just a map of that Marcellus and Utica, and we just happen to be living above some of the richest oil and gas reserves in the world. And I put this together years ago, and I couldn't find it updated, at least in this format, but I think this really shows what has changed in Tyler County. So we can come over here to Tyler County and look at this area here, and this graph, or this series of screens that I'm going to show you, shows from 2004 to 2005. It starts with that. These are the number of unconventional wells drilled. So these are the horizontal wells. And so in 2004 to 2005, you can see that. You see what happens the next year, and then the next year. And you can look at Tyler County and see what's happened in Tyler County. And then the next year, you're seeing the southern part of the state is kind of being left behind because they're finding out where those rich oil and gas reserves are. We can go another year and see what's happening here and here and 2018 to 2019. If I could find it in this format, I'm sure it'd get even more congested right there. We know it would, because all we gotta do is drive around the county and see that. So DEP data, this is all public information. Oh, in the back of your packets there are exhibits. I didn't label where they are, but it's the last 7, 8, 9 pages. If you just wanna, it's not gonna be identical to what I see here, but it might have for example, Exhibit A is gonna look like that in the back of your book. That's from DEP data. That shows the horizontal wells in Tyler County, the latest data I could get, 2026. If you really look at it, it's kind of interesting. It's maybe hard to see here, but what you'll see is maybe you'll see a well pad, and then you'll see all the horizontals going in each different direction. And when you look at a geographic map of Tyler County, a whole lot of Tyler County is covered there. So it's no surprise, and there's still some, even though you see most or a lot of the county covered, there's still the Utica that's probably largely untapped, and so we could still see some revenue coming from that. So back to this enrollment history. I said that was the biggest impact. Let's zoom in a little bit on the last few years of enrollment. That's what our graph looks like from 2016 on. So that's unusual for this county to actually see. Since 2000, we've actually increased enrollment here. We had an increase this year in enrollment. West Virginia counties, bear with me here, because I'm going to go over every county in the state of West Virginia that had an increase in enrollment. There's 55 counties, so bear with me. These are all of them that increased. Here's Tyler County. Here's Doddridge County, Hampshire County, Mineral County, and that's it. There are only 4 counties in the state of West Virginia that had an increase of enrollment from last year to this year, and nobody has had more of an increase in enrollment than Tyler County. What's that mean? Well, if there's anybody that knows country music star Billy Currington, he said it best, must be doing something right. There's a reason why a lot of kids are coming to Tyler County schools. We take great pride in that here in this building, and we are trying to do the best for our kids and take advantage of the resources that the oil and gas industry is providing for us that frankly didn't do 15 years ago. So I told you we had an increase in students from last year to this year. What effect does an increase in students have on our budget? The state aid funding formula is almost exclusively driven by student enrollment. Again, when I was in Wetzel County, some schools closed. There was a lot of talk out there, and it was misinformation. Everybody's familiar with misinformation because I'm seeing it now. There's a lot of misinformation. People say, well, those students are going to leave Wetzel County and they're going to go to Tyler, and Wetzel's going to lose all that funding and Tyler's going to get it all. It does not work that way. It does not work. It works that way in most counties. It does not work that way in our county. We have no state aid funding. So because we don't have that, when we get those additional students, the fact of the matter is it's an additional cost. So we have to budget for that, and we'll take every student we can take, but there is a cost to that. Those devices that we pay for, the transportation, the extra teachers that we pay for, that's part of how this works, because Tyler County schools receive no state aid because of how the state aid funding formula works. I will talk about that here in a little bit. Yes.
Just to, because this is where I think some people get confused is, like right now, that state aid formula is only setting our budget. It's not funding our budget.
That is absolutely correct. It's setting our budget, and I'll show that later. So it kind of tells you how much you would have received, and then it backs that completely off as to how much, what your local share is and how much they're going to take away from your state aid. In our case, and honestly, 3 other counties in the state of West Virginia, it used to be 4. Doddridge was first. They're now getting state aid a little bit. values have dropped a little bit. But it's us, Wetzel, and Marshall. That's it that's not receiving state aid. Dodger's receiving a minimum amount of state aid because they still have a large tax base. But yes, we'll talk about that here in a little bit. So revenue by source. I know that says 2011, 2012. I put that up there for a reason. That's what it used to look like here. So this blue section is your state aid. And it was the largest portion of our budget. This yellow section is almost all your taxes. There's a little bit of bank interest, and probably in 2011, 2012, there wasn't hardly any bank interest in there. That's your tax side. So there's always a share between your local share, your taxes, and your state aid. 2011, 2012, that's what it looked like. The year we're in next year, that's what it looks like. So now I want to clear something up here. There is a blue section there that says state allocations, and I know I said, well, we don't receive any state aid. We do receive state aid. We don't receive unrestricted state aid. That blue section, we do not even see in this county. It is sent on our behalf, and I'm required to budget for it. It's all it is a PIA amount for health insurance, the employer share. Doesn't cover everything, covers a portion of what we have, and then a retirement allocation, and then an unfunded retirement. That's a bigger number. It's something that the legislature did to help fund these promises that they've made to employees. But we don't see that money. We don't get to spend it on anything. It gets sent on our behalf, but I have to budget for it. And again, to keep driving that point home, this is our state aid that we were receiving since the past 20 years. And you can see we were receiving revenue from state aid, and it is dropping down to nothing in fiscal year 21. And if I say this once, I might say it 12 times tonight. That's not going to change whether we have an excess levy or not. That does not matter. Some people think the excess levy were to fail, well, we'll start getting state aid again. It does not work that way. It has to do with what our assessed property values are, and those aren't changing. So that does not change anything. It's just we won't get that state aid. We don't get state aid until our assessed property values drop enough to where we'll start receiving it again. So since taxes, I'm going to go back a little bit, since taxes represent 90% of our revenue here, and again, I'm just talking about Fund 11. There's so many things that go into this budget. There's another fund, Fund 61, which is a couple $1 million, but that's your federal programs like Title I, some of your special ed grants like IDEA. I'm not really going to talk about that too much tonight. We're just going to talk about Fund 11, which is our unrestricted budget. So since that's 90% of our revenue, let's talk about it in great detail. So this is part of some of your exhibits in the back, and that's a lot of numbers, but there's a lot of valuable information on this spreadsheet that I've put together. One thing that you're going to see is what this is telling you is, I'm going to go backwards here, 22, 23, 24, 25, this current year we're in, and then fiscal year 27, where we're going to be next year. This whole first section is what your assessed property values on. We don't determine what those assessed property values are. We just collect taxes based on that. So our rates haven't changed, but the property values have changed. And if you look where it's largely happening, this is the total, where it's largely our largest share is Class 3 property. And so you see back here, which we're going to talk a little bit about fiscal year 25, that anomaly of a year where we received a whole lot of tax dollars in this county. But that's not where we are now. This is a drop of 60% of where we were last year. And then next year's budget is dropping another 19%. That's not Jeff Lancaster's projected number. That's our assessed property values. Again, I told you, I know how big the pie is going to be next year. It's because I know what the assessed property values are for next year. And we're going to talk about how that happened. How did we get this this year of these high values and why it's dropped so much. But down here at the bottom is our actual tax dollars that we're receiving. This line here is our excess levy dollars that we have coming in. This row down here is our regular levy. Everybody has a regular levy in the state of West Virginia. That's how much we receive in our regular levy dollars. Again, if we have no excess levy, which I'm going to talk about here in a little bit, right there's the amount of money we're going to receive next year. That's $16.4 million without an excess levy. This is the combined of both. This is what we're receiving now. This is a combination of our excess levy up here, our regular levy here, and then that's the combination of both of them. So let's talk about, there's some misinformation about everybody's taxes are going up, and yes, just like the value of homes are going up, and the cost of eggs are going up, and the cost of groceries are going up, that's part of inflation. But reality is, most people are in class 2. There are people in class 3 properties. Most people are in class 2. Class 3 properties does include those royalty owners that have royalties outside of where they live, but also includes your businesses. Momentum would be in there, but also your Anteros and that sort of thing. So to kind of let you know what we're looking at here, the key idea for class 2, if you live in it or use it personally, it's usually class 2 properties. If you use it to make money or it's not your primary home, it's usually class 3 properties. I want to show you what has actually happened. Now these are real numbers. These are assessed values by class over time. This orange group is where everybody, most of our citizens in Tyler County are. Over time, since 2010, 2011, it's going up, but that's your graph. It's not going crazy. Those property values aren't going crazy. That's your assessed property value for class 2 properties. Again, I'm going to go back. Your class 2 property, if you live in it or use it personally, is usually class 2. Your class 3 properties, if it's used to make money or not your primary home, it's usually class 3. So here this green is at class 3. And you can see what's happened there, which has caused the big change in the amount of revenue that's been coming to this county. So the assessed property values jumped here. I'm going to talk about why that happened. And then the current year we're in, it has dropped drastically. That's where we are now. Where we're going to be next year, it's dropping even again. We are still better off than we were 15 years ago. There is no doubt about that. And also remember, this is value, so I'm going to go back. I'll go to another. So what does that go to? Our tax revenue is driven by assessed property values. What's happened in this county? Well, from 21 to 22, we had an 8% increase in property values. 22 to 23, they dropped by 16%. Again, we have nothing to do with that as a school system. We just, our revenue is affected by that. From 23 to 24, there was a 148% increase in property values. Again, I showed the graph. It is largely class 3 properties. From 24 to 25, that followed up again with a 62% increase on top of that. But the year we're in now, it has dropped by 60%. And next year, it's going to drop by another 19%. So we're not in the situation that we were in. Again, we're still better off than we used to be, but we are not in that we can't base all of our decisions on those years. We have to base it on the non-anomaly. If anybody's ever said those words together again, that's nice. Non-anomaly. So why? Why did we see that big increase? Well, here's why. It's largely impacted by whatever the price of natural gas is in these gas-rich counties. So when you see, here's the price of natural gas normally, and this year, it went well up over 9. Right now, by the way, I think it's like $2.50. It's not, it's nowhere near where it was at. This is the most recent graph I can get. So what does that mean to us? Well, there's that big spike. Well, what that means to us is we don't see that on our assessed property values for like a couple years later. So again, I showed you that our biggest increase was right here. Well, that was 2022-23 prices, but we don't see the revenue till 2025. That's what happened. And so 26, the year we're in now, it follows, like I'm saying, we have that drop, and it followed this gas price. 27, it followed that drop again. And likely 28, there are other factors in there. There are new wells being drilled. I know that's happening. But largely, it's going to follow this pattern in this county because the majority of our revenue comes from oil and gas. The property owners that have the royalties, and then to a much larger extent, oil and gas companies who pay those taxes as well. So to show you that in the interest of transparency and to show you that it's real, these are actual tax dollars receipted in Tyler County. These are, go back to, I think that's fiscal year 06, 2005, 2006. This was our tax revenue. By the way, you were also seeing state aid coming in at this time too. So we weren't solely dependent on that. But then, again, anybody that's lived here knows around this time, things started changing in this county. And then the oil and gas price, or the gas price went way up, and so did our tax collections. This is through March, and I put through March so that I could show you exactly what we've received this year through March. The final, and it's much less. We're not in the same boat, like I keep telling people, but it's still better off than we were. This is what we've received through March for tax dollars. That's a combination of your regular levy, which everybody has in the state, and your excess levy, which I believe 43 counties have an excess levy. It wouldn't be too hard to point out the ones that don't if you drove around and found that. Next year, I put expected. It doesn't mean that's more like what we're going. I know what we're going to receive in revenue. I don't know when everybody's going to pay their taxes. So this is what we expect to receive through March the next year. So to look at how I actually budget, there is a WEVA system. It's our financial system that the entire state uses. That's what you're looking at there. These are your two main parts of your revenue. And again, I told you this doesn't have every page of our revenue on it. There's your bank interest. We're estimated about $1 million in interest. That all depends on the fluctuation of interest rates too. But this is your state aid that I'm talking about. That's your retirement allocation on the next page, which I don't have up here for you. It has your PIA allocation. Those are the amounts of money that we get from the state that just gets sent on our behalf. This is where our bread is buttered. Am I saying that correct? This is where the lion's share of our revenue comes from. It comes from our regular levy, which everybody gets, and that's last year's number compared to this year's number. I'm sorry, this year's current budget compared to next year's budget. We're going to drop about $4 million in our regular levy. Our excess levy, which we're going to have whether the vote's yes or no, that levy still goes into effect till July of 28. We're going to drop another $4.9 million in revenue next year. The truth of the matter is, when you add those numbers up with what we lost this year in revenue, that's about $80 million. So again, $80 million from a really good year. I'm not going to sugarcoat that for anybody. It was a really good year, but we did lose $80 million in revenue over this year and next year is what we're going to be losing. So back to this. Let's talk about that pie again. Let's talk about this graph again. How big is our pie? That's the big question, is what is our revenue amount going to be? So again, 24, 25. I'm going to show you a series of pictures here that are proportional to our revenue that we're having coming in for taxes. So that was our, as some people have said, unicorn year, our anomaly. $115.8 million. This year, that's proportional. That's our $45 million in revenue that we're receiving this year. Next year, it's dropping to $36 million. These are all, again, proportional. And I added one more thing in here because people do not understand this. Again, we are going to have an excess levy this year, or this next year we're budgeting. But if we did not have an excess levy next year, that is the size of our pie. That follows through the other slide with all those numbers on it. That's the amount of regular levy funds that we're going to receive. The state would have given us about $12 million, and then we get to keep the little bit of extra over that from our regular levy from local taxes. But that $16.4 million, if we did not have an excess levy, it's not like somebody's coming in with a cavalry and saying, okay, let's start giving them state aid now. It doesn't work that way. We lose the excess levy, that's going to be the size of our pie next year. So, what if this happens again? What if those oil prices go crazy? What if 23 to 24 goes up another 148%? You know, if we have those years like that, what if it goes up even more? What if our pie just goes crazy? We have put something in place that has never been in place in our levy before. We've put this language in the levy to work with our taxpayers for this. And that's the actual language. It's going to be in what's being voted on May 12th. But we added this. That was in works before I became treasurer here in October. But we added this. The Board of Education of the County of Tyler reserves unto itself as a levying body the right and authority to reduce the rates of the excess levy should increase assessments, produce funds beyond projected needs in any year specified in the levy call, in accordance with Section 6G, Article 8, Chapter 11 of the West Virginia Code. So if we have one of those years where our revenue goes way up, we're not building another new school. We should be able to. And again, I don't get to make that call. This board gets to make that call if we get back where it's under board control, which should happen sometime. And when that happens, the board gets to make that call. And we can look at what our assessed property values are. We can see, wait a second, they're going way up again. We can reduce those levy amounts. We weren't allowed to do that before. We're allowed to do that if this levy passes. I'm going to fly through these slides because we don't get state aid, but I do want this to be on record as to what we would have received if we received state aid and show you kind of how that works. I'm just going to fly through them. There's steps in the state aid funding formula, how much you would get under step 1, step 2, all these steps. Transportation, student support personnel, it's part of the funding formula. Then you get to step 8. All step 8 is the total of all the other steps. I said 12 million is the number I threw out a little bit ago. That's the amount of money. If we had no taxes in this county, we would receive $11.8 million from the state. That's how that works. But there's a step 9 of this formula. Step 9 says, okay, what's your local taxes? And they say, okay, if you're collecting this much, we're going to reduce the amount of state aid we're sending you. So that's how it works. They're saying of that 11.8, your local share is higher than that, we're going to reduce you to 0. Again, 3 other counties are in that boat with us. 2 other counties, us and 2 other counties. I'm going to fly through these budget notes. These are just some things I think the public should be aware of. There are 3 different funds this year. Fund 11 is what we're talking about tonight. Fund 51, I really don't have a budget in Fund 51 because we don't have enough revenue to put money there this year. The pie's not big enough to, that's our capital projects fund. Luckily, we have placed money there to cover the elementary school, to cover, you know, these other projects. That's the main project that we've set some money there. We do have a concrete project that I'm going to talk about here in a little bit. But there's already money transferred to that capital projects fund. There's not enough revenue to do that this year. And then Fund 61, I talked about briefly, those federal grants. Pay raise info. There was, through House Bill 4765, it was passed during the 2026 legislative session, a 3% across the board raise for professional and service personnel. That equates to an increase of $1,560 for professionals and $870 for service. Again, since Tyler County Schools receives no state aid, the entire financial cost of that raise must come from local tax dollars. Mr. Hiley and I were working on a while back, what's our operating budget? Well, since we had that number, it's already gone up. It's gone up because we have a raise that we have to pay for. That's a state mandated raise. We are thankful that our employees get that, but because normally the state would increase the state aid to pay for that. But we're at that level where we don't get it, so we have to fund that. And that's just that portion of the raise, but then we have to pay the Social Security, the retirement, the workers' comp on top of that. And on top of that, your PIA is increased by another 3%. Well, that's later on in the slide. I'm getting ahead of myself. Budget includes payments for the following. We are in year 7. Next year will be year 7 of a 10-year lease to own, $359,268 for that bus garage. The athletic complex, we're in year 7 of a 10-year lease to own, $760,000 there. And then iPad devices for student use will be on year 1 of a 3-year lease to own on that. Those devices are not cheap. The lease to own thing, I'm going to give Mr. Davis all the credit in the world for that. It's a smart move. It's the interest that we are paying on the bus garage, the athletic complex. We're earning way more in interest than what we're paying. It's a smart move. We could have tried to pay for it all. We could pay for it all now. If we tried to do that, we are earning more interest in the payments we're making. It's just smart financial business. Same thing with those iPads. We could buy those iPads, but we're going to pay a ridiculously low percentage. I hope the iPad people aren't listening, but a ridiculously low percentage in interest to ultimately own those devices. We're covering the cost of all salaries. We have I don't believe, any rifts this year. We have PIA premiums are going up by approximately 3%. That's both employee and employer. The employee, it's a bad deal for the employee. It's a bad deal for the employer because we're not getting state aid. We have to fund that additional cost. People don't know that a family plan costs us like $20,000 for one family plan. So it's not cheap. OPEB, we're not going to talk about OPEB. Workers' comp rates, again, all this is part of the budget. There's no way I can cover in the time that I'm speaking everything that goes into the budget. But we do have one of the lowest workers' comp rates in the state in our industry. What that EMOD is, industry average is like, it would be a 1. That's your industry average. We're at 0.58. So that gives you an idea of how much lower we are than the industry average on our workers' comp costs. Budget includes routine supplies, equipment requested by various entities of the school system, sufficient expenses to meet the current levy call, teaching supplies, new textbook adoptions. The budget includes $61,050 as requested to be paid to the WVU Extension Office. Budget includes $60,000 each to be paid to the Sistersville and Middleburn Public Libraries. The purchase of 2 new school buses, projection of constant participation in the child nutrition program. That is something that I might talk about now. I have a slide on it later, but it's some miscommunication out there as well. People are thinking, well, you don't need the excess levy to pay for your child nutrition program for the free meals because you're under a federal program. We are, but the federal program does not cover the entire cost. Federal program covers a portion of the cost based on the percentage of high need you have in your county. Our county contribution for our child nutrition program is expected to be $845,000 next year. Carryover, I'm not going to talk about that too much. Projected bank interest, I already talked about that. Cost of bus drivers and fuel for school co-curricular and extracurricular trips. I'm trying to do this in the interest of time because I could talk about this. People that know me, I could spend hours. And nobody wants to hear that. They're required to budget for major federal and state programs in their initial budgets instead of when they're awarded, so I'm doing that in Fund 61. We have 4 school resource officers in our budget. Final comps, I already talked about that. Sub costs are increasing, partly as expected. I have a graph later in that to show that. You have a teacher shortage. Substitute costs for both professionals and service. So the charts later, you know, you have a teacher shortage, you're going to have higher costs. This is different too, and that's also not what's included in that number we came up with, Mr. Hiley, on the operating budget. The state requires us now, and I think it has to do with, I don't want to name some of the counties up north, but the state requires a 5% contingency reserve now. It wasn't required before, it was recommended. Now it's required. So we have our 5% contingency reserve would be around $2.1 million. We have $3.1 million in there. We have a little bit more in our contingency reserve than is required. But if I didn't have it there, I'd just transfer it to probably Capital Projects Fund. And ultimately, that might be what we do anyway when we have, if we don't spend that, it becomes part of the carryover, and then we'll reestablish the budget at that time. Let's talk about our expenditures. We talked about revenue so far. Expenditures by category, it's in your back. There's your Exhibit D. And what you'll see there is salaries and costs in our county represent almost 60% of our budget. If you want to see the dollar amount there, there's the dollar amount. And again, I want to bring this up. I showed you what our revenue would be without an excess levy. For those people that think we don't need an excess levy in this county, I showed you what our revenue would be without it. I'll show it to you again. That's what our revenue will be next year. Now again, we're going to have an excess levy next year. It's not up. If we didn't have it, we'd have $16.4 million. Do you see what our salaries and costs are right now? $24.5 million. If people think there won't be changes because our excess levy, it's just a complete misinformation. Now, you might say, well, you got too many people, or you're paying too much money. I'm gonna argue with both of those. We already said about the amount of money we're paying. We're not way out of whack with that. And we are competing with other counties of the north, south, east, west of us that have excess levies in place, that have oil and gas like we do. We have to compete or we lose teachers. That's how it is. And do we have too many people? Let that sink in. If nothing else sinks in tonight, let that sink in right now. $16.4 million is the revenue we would have next year without an excess levy. That's positions. We're not talking about programs. That's something else. We're talking about positions that we're going to have to, your largest cost in school systems, we're a service industry, are your salaries and your costs. So in the back you have the final comps enrollment report. I'm going to summarize it for you here. People think that we might have too many people. This is something I put together years ago and I keep up with. I think Mr. Davis actually shared it with you last year as well. You can, and I did it for a reason in Wetzel County because I knew we were number one. I knew we needed to make changes in Wetzel County. We were number one in Wetzel as far as the number of personnel over the funding formula. And a lot of that had to do with all the small schools we had and the distance and all that. But Tyler is sitting here. Again, you look at the ones that are up here, they're mostly oil and gas counties. There are some things that you might be concerned with. Hancock County, you know, is going through some struggles right now. These are alarming numbers. Tyler is sitting only 13 professional positions over the funding formula. That is, for the amount of revenue we have, to be at 13 people over the funding formula is kind of impressive. But looking at it this way, the state average, per 1,000 kids, the state average is 79 professionals for 1,000 kids. Tyler has 78 per 1,000 kids. We are below the state average, and we're lucky enough to have some revenue where we could afford a few more with the revenue we received a couple years ago. But we're lower than the state average. I think that's being financially responsible. Let's look at the service personnel side. We're a little higher up on that list with the service personnel, but that's tough. And it's also tough because that all depends on your special ed population and how many aides you need to have. And the increase in population has caused us to hire additional bus drivers and additional routes and aides for those routes. So there's a lot that goes into that. The state average there is 65. We're at 75 professionals. Almost everybody is over the funding formula in service personnel. That's just tough to do with the funding formula. Coming back here, the child nutrition budget, briefly talk about that. There's our cooks, some of our cooks. Just like everything in this budget, there's a whole lot of time and effort that goes into coming up with accurate numbers. This is a budget model that's used just for the child nutrition program. That's what comes up, how much revenue you have coming in, how much your expenses are supposed to be, your food, your milk, based on history, inflation. A whole lot that goes in that. Mrs. Kimball and I sat down and worked on this together. You come up with your $844,000 expected county contribution towards the child nutrition program. A good number here is we serve around 150,000 lunches a year. Substitute costs. We're winding down here, I think. Substitute costs, if you want to see what our substitute costs are, the blue line is our professionals. The past few years, the orange, I think that's orange line, is our service costs for the past few years. And that doesn't include the Social Security and workers' comp that comes along with that. That's just the actual pay for those subs. It's going up a little bit. I know it's something we try to address, but it's, again, teacher shortage makes that tough. Exhibit G shows this graph, and I've shown this graph a little bit just with the pie in front of it, but this kind of tells you where your funds are being allocated. Notable items in the budget. We have instructional supplies and hygiene supplies provided, effective 2022. We're not asking our parents to get their supply list like you used to see at Walmart and you need to come up with this. We take care of all that. Class dues, field trips are covered by the county since 2022. Meals included free for all students and staff, effective 2023 for staff. Students were earlier than that. We limit the fundraisers run at all the schools. We're trying not to put more of a burden than the tax burden that's already out there for these, for our citizens. State and national academic trips are funded. All county residents are admitted to all events free of charge. We run activity buses to both ends of the county. A couple more slides and I'm going to wrap it up. Major projects already in the fiscal year 26 budget. It's not showing in next year's budget because we've already set these funds aside. We currently have some large projects recently completed or in the works. We have the completion of the gym entrance, and I'm calling it a gym entrance. Most people know it's much more than a gym entrance. It includes a theater space and a music space. It includes wrestling and cheerleading practice area. It includes a school store for the business classes that we offer. It includes some storage. So that's part of that. The completion of the vocational agricultural building, that's already paid for in this year's budget. We have this project coming up. Our building is, 1993, the middle school and high school, so we're getting to the point where there might be some tripping hazards or something like that. We've got to fix those problems with our concrete repair and replacement. Window and door replacement, that's also coming up at the school. That we've already set these funds aside, so we shouldn't have to tap into next year's budget for that. And of course, the big one, Tyler Consolidated Elementary School. I do want to say something about that because I don't know if a lot of people realize that, but what has happened here in this county is so rare. You don't build an elementary school without running an additional tax. An additional tax, I'm talking about a school bond. Most schools are built with an additional school bond. Because we had the unicorn year, we were able to set aside some funds. And we're able to do this without further increasing the tax burden for Tyler County citizens. So that's just, to be able to build that facility without a school bond is an impressive thing here, and a rare thing. So where we are tonight, the evening of April 27th, I'm required to have a balanced budget, and I do have a balanced budget. $41.6 million in revenue, $41.6 million in expenditures. What will happen is I will submit this to the state on May 4th. There will be the adopting the proposed budget, and then the final budget on the meeting after that. So, finally, my last slide. I came across a quote by Warren Buffett. Whether you like him or not, I don't even know if I like him or not, but Warren Buffett, I love this quote. Someone is sitting in the shade today because someone planted a tree a long time ago. What we're trying to do here, and I'm thrilled to be working in this county with the people that I'm working with because I see their passion for what they do and the effort that goes into this. We are trying to plant trees for our students, for our citizens, and future, hopefully, tax-paying citizens of Tyler County. We're trying to plant those trees while we have the resources, and I think we're doing a good job of that. And that concludes my budget presentation tonight. I know that's a lot. That's almost an hour on the dot. I don't know, that clock's a little early. But unless you have any questions, that's all that I have for you tonight.
So when we meet on May 4th, that's when the actual budget, you'll present that to us and we'll look at it, or is this?
This is really the presentation of the budget. Now, I will, if there are any changes between now and then, I will present that to you. Most likely there will be no changes unless there's something that comes up from the State Department or something that I've missed. If there are any changes between this budget and then I will let you know. But this is the budget for the school system. This will be submitted to the state for review.
If there are no changes between now and May 4th.
Yes. Either way, I've got to submit the budget to the state. But yes, but that's.
So do you have a final cost of what the what you call the gym entrance?
I don't have it with me, but I can get it to you.
Yeah.
Yep. Let me make myself a note.
So Jeff, going back to the increases, the revenue, if I look at this correctly, the 23-24 increase 148%.
Yes.
24 and 25 it was 62% increase. That 62 increase is above the 148 that we had prior before that, correct?
Correct.
All right, and then 25, 26, we lost 60% of those two increases.
Correct.
And then, and of course, in this year, we're looking at another 19%.
Yes. And this.
And with that accumulation, we're still into the plus, on the plus side of between the 4 years.
Yes. If you look at this right here, those numbers come straight from the bottom. I'm just not doing my point, but that percent increase line there, a few up, you can see the actual increases and decreases in assessed values. So, yeah, that follows along there.
Thank you, sir.
All right, that's all I have, Mr. Hiley.
That being said, I'd ask for this meeting to be adjourned.
Okay, the next regular meeting will be held Monday, May 4th at 7 o'clock, and it will be held here. So it is 7:55. This meeting is adjourned.
Good job, Mr. Lancaster.
Yes, thank you.
All of them, a lot of work.